Last night on this show, we highlighted one example of how the Voting Rights Act works. This is a community college district in the greater Houston area. They tried to change the way they conduct elections in this district. They tried to cut the number of polling places in this district from 84 polling places down to 12. And the list of 12 proposed new polling places had one very notable feature. The new list made it really easy to vote if you were a white person and really hard to vote if you were not a white person. Look, the site with the smallest proportion of minority voters, so the whitest voting site, was set up to serve 6,500 voters. The most heavily minority site serves over 67,000 voters. So the big new election idea in this election district in Texas was that the most heavily minority polling place should serve 10 times as many voters as the whitest polling place. The Justice Department told that election district in Texas that they could not do that. They could not make that change. The Justice Department looked at that plan and told them to try again, to try to find a way that was more fair. That happened because Texas officials have to get an advance okay from the Justice Department before they change their election laws, because of Texas's history of racial discrimination in elections. Discrimination like, say, making the polling places for black and brown people handle 10 times as many voters as the polling places for white people. Because Texas has done and has kept doing stuff like that, Texas needs pre-clearance when they make changes. If they think they should not be on that pre-clearance list anymore, Texas could apply to opt out. They could try to prove that they are not trying to discriminate anymore. Texas has not been able to opt out. And so the Justice Department was able to block that plan in that greater Houston area college district. Also, the Justice Department was able to block Texas Republicans' voter ID plan. Rick Perry signed this law when he was trying to make a splash running for president. But the Justice Department said the Texas voter ID law would be a disaster in terms of racial discrimination in Texas elections, since Hispanic registered voters are more than twice as likely as non-Hispanic registered voters to lack the ID that would be required to vote in Texas under the new law. So Texas plans like that. New laws to block Hispanics from voting at more than double the rate of non-Hispanics. Or killing 80% of the polling places and setting up new ones where white people get 10 times the service as non-white people. Plans like these from the last few years in Texas, they were blocked from ever coming into effect. Even though Texas wanted to do them, they were blocked from coming into effect because the Justice Department could block them because of the Voting Rights Act. As of today, that's over. The court did not change anything about the basic idea that some places cannot be trusted to make new election laws on their own. They should have to get pre-clearance from the Justice Department. The court left that in place, theoretically, but they invalidated the existing list of places that qualify for that kind of special scrutiny. They threw that part of it instead to Congress, in its infinite wisdom, to come up with a new way of identifying places that need that special scrutiny of pre-clearance in order to change their laws. And until Congress gets around to working on that, it is open season on voting rights right now in America. In Texas today, the Republican Attorney General announced, with today's decision, the state's voter ID law will take effect immediately. In Mississippi today, same thing, the Republican Attorney General announcing the process for implementation of voter ID begins today. In Alabama today, same thing, the Republican Attorney General and the Republican Secretary of State announcing voter ID will be the first process that we will go through under this new ruling. In North Carolina, same deal. Republicans had been holding back from voter ID there because they knew it would probably be too racially discriminatory to pass the pre-clearance requirement. But now that that requirement's gone, hey, full steam ahead. Now we can go with the full bill, says the Republican Rules Committee chairman in North Carolina's Republican-controlled Senate. Why stop just with voter ID? He says he predicted an omnibus voting bill would surface in the Senate next week that could go beyond voter ID to include issues such as reducing early voting, eliminating Sunday voting, and barring same-day voter registration. They might not have been able to get away with racially discriminatory policies like that before today, but as of 10 a.m. today, go for it. The floodgates are open. The floodgates are open. Anything these states with a history of racial discrimination could not get away with before because they were covered under the Voting Rights Act and the Justice Department would block them, now they can go ahead. And they are. Day one, they're already rushing forward, and there's nothing to stop them unless Congress fixes it. What are the odds of Congress fixing it? No, really, what are the odds?
The Voting Rights Act that broke the segregationist lock on the ballot box rose from the courage shown on a Selma bridge one Sunday afternoon in March of 1965. On that day, African Americans, including a member of the United States Congress, John Lewis, marched across the Edmund Pettus Bridge in a protest intended to highlight the unfair practices that kept him off the voter rolls. Today, we renew a bill that helped bring a community on the margins into the life of American democracy. My administration will vigorously enforce the provisions of this law, and we will defend it in court. I am proud to sign the Voting Rights Act Reauthorization and Amendments Act of 2006.
The vote in the Senate that made it possible for then-President George W. Bush to reauthorize the Voting Rights Act 7 years ago, that vote was 98-0, famously, right? In the Senate, it was unanimous. You know what, though? In the House, it was not unanimous. It was still an overwhelming vote, but there were 33 no votes in the House, 33 Republicans in the House who voted no that year. And of those 33 House Republicans who voted against the Voting Rights Act, 19 of them are still in the House as Republican members of Congress. And occasionally, House Republicans do pipe up on this issue, as Georgia Republican Paul Brown did last year when he introduced an amendment to block the enforcement of the Voting Rights Act. He brought it up in the middle of the night, tried to get it passed as part of a big spending bill, and John Lewis, that Democratic Georgia congressman who was beaten to within an inch of his life in Alabama on the Edmund Pettus Bridge in a demonstration that became a conflagration of police violence, which is how we got the Voting Rights Act in the first place. John Lewis was there in the House in the middle of the night last year, in May of last year, to answer Paul Brown when Paul Brown tried to block enforcement of the Voting Rights Act. And when John Lewis confronted him on the floor of the House, Paul Brown just collapsed, apologizing and stuttering and wishing he had not brought it up.
Maybe some of us need to study a little contemporary history dealing with the question of voting rights. Just think, before the Voting Rights Act of 1965, it was almost impossible for many people in the state of Georgia, in Alabama, in Virginia, in Texas, to register to vote, to participate in the democratic process. It's shameful that you would come here tonight and said to the Department of Justice that you must not use 1 penny, 1 cent, 1 dime, $1 to carry out the mandate of Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act.
I apologize to my dear friend from Georgia if he's gotten angry with this amendment, and it's never my intent to do so, and I'm going to ask unanimous consent to withdraw the amendment.
So which is it now, Republican Party? Are you Paul Brown stuttering and apologizing and saying you never meant any offense, taking it back? Or are you Paul Brown introducing a stealth amendment in the middle of the night trying to kill the Voting Rights Act? Are you every single Republican in the United States Senate voting to reauthorize the Voting Rights Act, standing proudly by as your Republican president when he's with your Republican president as he signs it? Or are you the 33 House Republicans who that same year voted no, voted to kill the Voting Rights Act? Are you the Republican House Majority Leader, Eric Cantor, marching with John Lewis this past year to reenact what happened on the Edmund Pettus Bridge, to reenact the human toll and the human endurance of violence that brought us the Voting Rights Act? Or are you these Republican state officials in Alabama, in Mississippi, in North Carolina, in Texas, rushing ahead today with the laws that were too racist for the Voting Rights Act to allow, but that now can be forced through because the Voting Rights Act is dead? Dead unless Republicans in Congress agree that it should be saved. Which Republican Party are you? In a blistering, long, incredulous dissent from the court's ruling today, liberal Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg said that the court erred egregiously. She said the court dramatically overreached. She said, quote, hubris is a fit word for today's demolition of the Voting Rights Act. John Lewis put it in terms just as stark. He said the Supreme Court put a dagger in the heart of the Voting Rights Act. The thing about this dagger in the heart, though, is that the patient with the dagger in the heart is still alive. And the doctor standing over the body thinking about what to do next, turns out, is a Republican. The Voting Rights Act did not have Section 5 struck down. Preclearance still exists, theoretically. The Voting Rights Act can be saved right away if Congress decides to save it. The Democrats want to save it. Unanimously. The Democrats, they control the Senate. Their Judiciary Chairman in the Senate said today he will get to work immediately on legislation to save it. The Republicans control the House. So far, their Judiciary Chairman has said nothing. This is the cornerstone of American civil rights law. This is legacy time. What are you guys going to do?